The Publishing for Profit podcast is brought to you by Ghostwriters & Co. Earn more money by publishing better content and learn how to increase your thought leadership so you can build your brand. Head over to ghostwritersandco.com for more information. That's ghostwritersandco.com. And now, your host, Joel Mark Harris.
Hello and welcome to the Publishing for Profit podcast. This is Joel Mark Harris, your host. Today we talked to Hussein Hallak, a serial entrepreneur who grew up in Syria, moved to Dubai where he started several companies. He ran an ad agency that had several multi-million-dollar clients. He moved to Vancouver, which is where I met him, and now he primarily works with startups to help improve their performance. We have a great conversation. It's always fun to talk to Hussein about a lot of things, including growing up in Syria, some of his successes, a little bit of his failures, what he's learned along the way. So hopefully you enjoy. Hello, and welcome to the Publishing for Profit podcast. Today, I have a very exciting guest, Hussein Hallak, who is a serial entrepreneur, speaker, and an author now. So welcome to the podcast, Hussein.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, cool. So I want to start, so Hussein is from Syria, and it's a place that we just know by the news reports. But can you tell us a little bit about what it was like growing up in Syria and what your childhood in particular was like?
I would say I can't compare it to any other childhood. I can't say it's a normal childhood or non-normal childhood because it's different. That's what I could say. I think there are three phases in my childhood. One that is the happy, nice childhood where everything was nice. Syria is generally a very liberal place. Compared to the rest of that part of the world, especially in the 70s when I was growing up, very 70s, early 80s. So I grew up. We had my parents were employees of like different things. My mom was a teacher. My dad was an employee of the government, and everyone worked for the for government in Syria in one form or way because it's it owns everything in the country. So it was good money. They had parties all the time. We had good fun. What else can I say? And then came the other part of I wouldn't say, well, it's late childhood, kind of early teens, where we had sanctions in Syria, and we used to stand in line to kind of get rice, sugar, and tea, and there was no like the necessities of everyday kind of life. It's scarce. So, and then I would say you can't consider it childhood. That's that's the childhood. It was been between being at a time where everything's available. It's a lot of fun. Growing up, my dad and mom having a lot of parties, kind of everybody joyful and having good time, in a sense. And then came the other part where I didn't know it was sanctions. I didn't know what the hell was going on. I just knew that we had scarcity of money and standing in line and kind of fighting for food, if you wish. I remember vividly the lines of kind of standing in line to get bread even, and they being pushed around and pushing around just to get our daily bread needs kind of thing. So yeah, I lived that. That's a little bit about that part of childhood. I used to love kind of play. I love toys, love Lego. My uncle lived abroad, so he would send me those toys. I don't think we could buy them from Syria at the time. Don't remember buying a lot of toys. We're not that rich. So yeah. Does that give you an idea?
Yeah.
Maybe not what you expected.
Well,
I
It
didn't
seems
expect the question though, so that's
it seems like a typical childhood, right? And just growing up and uh, playing with toys and wanting the new thing, right? So um, yeah, it's interesting. Have you always been interested in entrepreneurship because um, you're heavily involved in the startup community, especially? I know that you speak a lot about entrepreneurship. Your new book that we'll talk about later is about entrepreneurship. Has it always been a passionate subject for you?
no. I was well, growing up, my biggest passion was towards medicine and science. I was fascinated with science, fascinated with medicine. Everything that I read about was about these kind of things. I think even my interest in like the medical field was also about the science, I would say, about the medical field. So I would say uh, entrepreneurship. I didn't know what the word meant until I think it was 2003 or something. So that would have been, I would say, my 30s, because the word doesn't exist uh, in our vocabulary, in the sense that we have a word that represents what entrepreneurship is, but it's not part of our lexicon in the Arabic language. You're uh, Most of the people, especially in Syria where I grew up, we are a community of, I would say, farmers and landowners. So, my grandfather was a bourgeoisie, if you wish. Uh, like he was a landowner, um, and in his mind, he's a farmer, but he was a landowner. He owned a lot of land, and so we have a farming community, and then you work for the government. You're an employee of the government. You, let's say, work for a school, work for let's say, any of the institutions of the government, like the ministries, and very few people were business owners. So you have small business owners who own shops and kind of sell some clothes and stuff like that. So very small, and you have the large business owners who mostly worked in trade. Syria is part of the Silk Road, and I grew up in Damascus, born and raised Damascus. So it's a lot of that trade. So trading probably is the closest to what entrepreneurship, if we was, and it was more like owning a business and being a trader. So it's not in our psyche that you go out and say, I want to take an idea and execute it. Mostly what ends up happening is people go into trading, like they start trading stuff, and that's their path for entrepreneurship. But it's not entrepreneurship as it's known in the West, where somebody has an idea and goes and builds a widget, for example. These are called inventors in our lexicon, if you wish. So I had no idea what that is. It's kind of like fish in the sea. You don't recognize what it's around you. You don't recognize what's missing or what's there as what it is until it was, I think, 2003, and I was reading when I moved to Dubai in 2003, and the distinction there is that I had wider access to the internet, faster access. I remember vividly installing the 2 megabit connection into my office. And in Syria, we had a modem, 57K modem, and it didn't even operate at that speed. So it took me, let's say, 6 hours to get a website that is 3 megabyte size. So you didn't have access to that kind of information. So when I in Dubai, I read voraciously online because of what I found. It's like, oh, so this is what it's called, what I'm doing. So me starting ad agencies, me kind of coming up with an idea and following the reason I moved to Dubai is a company kind of acquired one of my startups. At the time, it was an online gaming startup. We used to build websites as a game. And the first client that we got was the Disney of the Middle East, if you wish. And they acquired our company and gave me a position in Dubai. And that's how I ended up in Dubai. So I learned about this. I was like, oh, this is called entrepreneurship. So this is what I am. So that was kind of a weird thing, because obviously compared to your childhood, you would know what an entrepreneur is. You have people you look up to. I didn't know what an entrepreneur is. I just like, hey, this is who I am. and so I guess I am an entrepreneur then. So that's how my relationship kind of with entrepreneurship. I always wanted to do stuff, and I pursue them and do them. Basically, that's how I built my companies. And then I got to find out that this is called entrepreneurship, and then I started reading, because I grew up studying engineering, and there's nothing you can take to kind of, we don't have business administration, we have the what is it, it's called the University of Trading, just to tell you how trading is actually a big deal. We don't have a business administration in our university. The Damascus University is one of the most prestigious universities in that part of the world, and we didn't have something called business. So there's no, what would you do if you graduate from there? There's no such thing. There's trading, because trading is such a big part of how we do. And that's basically where you study things that have to do with business, like accounting, like business administration and stuff like that. So that's kind of a weird way of how our relationship with entrepreneurship. And that's why I don't see a lot of entrepreneurship coming out of there in the same, let's say, scale as you see, for example, in Vancouver, Canada, because it's not part of the psyche. It's not part of what you do. You don't go up and say, oh, I can be an entrepreneur, I can be this, you can be a doctor, a lawyer, a trader, an accountant, stuff like that.
And then, so was it a big shock moving to Dubai? I had imagined that the entrepreneur community, the startup community, is quite robust there, with everything that's going on. So was it a big change for you coming from Syria?
Not as entrepreneurship. I think that grew later on, when after the .com, and obviously when I moved there, there is a community that was growing, but not as much. Dubai is known as the kind of the headquarter. It's not set up to at the time in the 2000s. It's not set up to nurture entrepreneurship. In the 2010s and like in 2010 and beyond, they started kind of paying attention to that and nurturing it even more. There are initiatives, but it was way behind, let's say, what the Western world is. But the biggest shock there is, number one, being paid a shit ton of money compared to what I was being paid in Syria, which was not good for somebody who didn't handle money and grew up in a place where money was not, we always wanted money, but it's not for the sake of money. It's basically, you grew up and saying, what do you want to do for the world? And what kind of impact do you want to have? And since money was, I grew up around a family that had fights around money all the time. My grandfather was very rich and everybody wanted a piece of their land. So my father left all of that and say, I don't want any piece of that. Kind of like, how do you say, dynasty, kind of a series kind of approach. So he didn't want that. So that's what I grew up around. I said, okay, I want to do stuff not for the money. And then when I moved there, I got paid not a lot of money, but compared to what is in Syria, it's a shit ton of money. And I'm not a consumerism kind of thing. Like the things that I bring joy to me is going to attend a movie. So that's what I did. There's a ton of movies there. So I spent all my time. Sometimes I would attend 2 or 3 movies in one night. I didn't have a lot of friends. It sounds like. So yeah, that's the thing. The thing that shocked me more is also I grew up around. I didn't have banking in Syria, so I never had a bank account, never had a credit card. So imagine in your 30s being introduced to that, and a lot of money, and being at the kind of the Las Vegas of the Arab world. So I made a shit ton of mistakes, if you wish. It's a lot of wasted a ton of money, made a lot of mistakes. So it was a grand experiment, I would say. So it was a lot of fun. Yeah.
And so, is there any lesson that you learned from basically being very conservative with money, and then having almost too much, and being overwhelmed by the entire experience?
Yeah. Well, it led to one of probably my biggest failures is launching, because money was not the primary thing, and I didn't have the proper business education, which led to my interest in studying entrepreneurship and kind of mentoring others. Is in 2006 I launched the leading and number one basically marketplace for Arabic art in the world, and but I did it all wrong. So the way I did it is I first went and kind of built up the marketplace, got the artists, put them on spent a ton of money building the market. Remember, that's 2006, 2005, 2006. WordPress was just coming out in the sense that making it available for people to build websites. Unlike now you can build a website for, what is it, like $100. You can have the grandest website with all the bells and whistles. At the time, it took me, just to give you an idea, let's say actually $100 is a bit expensive. $30, you can get WordPress for free, even website hosting for free for 6 months and stuff like that, and $30 for a theme, let's say. It cost me $30,000.
Wow.
To just get started. Okay, so that's to give you kind of the kind of the scale between what we have right now and at that time. So at the time we didn't have we had what we call portals, and there's a ton of access and work on it. So it spent a lot of money to get it up and running and put it out there. And one of the biggest challenges is obviously you build something, that doesn't mean it has a market. So because I wasn't worried about how we make money, I was worried about, I want to get my idea out there. And that's always the wrong thing to do. I put my idea out there, and surprise, surprise, collectors didn't want to buy art off the internet. It was a new thing, even though, I mean, there are websites, but not necessarily to buy art, and not necessarily to buy art that is as exotic as Arabic art, because in all of the Arab world, we're 300 million people at the time. And I could find, let's say, 1,200 artists. That's a massive amount of artists. That's to put them there. But that's 1,200 artists that people couldn't have access to. So you have one day you don't have access to these artists, and the other day you have access to those artists. Usually you would go to exotic, galleries, and the galleries are the gateway to do that. And there's this whole experience of, you found this artist and you paid for access, and you paid for their painting, and you collected it. Now you're just buying it offline, online if you wish, or you have access to them. Collectors were not excited about this. They wanted the experience of going to Christie's and bidding over a painting and paying hundreds of thousands of dollars for a painting they could get, let's say, for 30 or whatever. So they wanted that experience. That's the whole thing. They didn't want to save money. They didn't want that kind of access. They wanted the restricted access. So I didn't have any idea about that. All I had an idea about, I wanted to have Arabic art, to be available for the whole world. So my approach to this was not a business approach. Was, I believe in this. I believe Arabic art is an important expression of the Arabic world. And I know all these artists and I want to help them. So I built this. So I ended up losing $1 million in the process.
Wow.
So that's to answer your question about my introduction to having a lot of money and having a lot of access. And without the frameworks, without the training, money, access, the right environment doesn't help. You really need, I mean, they help a little bit, but if you have the training and the proper frameworks and the understanding of how you should go about it, it's far better and far more important.
So is that where your passion for helping startups come from?
To a large extent, yes. I think in one way I'm trying to prevent this from happening to other entrepreneurs. So I think of myself and what I could have done if I didn't go through this, because I know myself, I'm resilient. I was lucky to have the family that I have. I was lucky to have the friends that I have and the people around me that helped me through this. A lot of people don't have that and don't have access to that. So something like this, and something even smaller, like even if you lose $20,000, $10,000, that may wreck somebody's life for a while. And I grew up in a certain environment where I'm very resilient in the sense that I bounced back really quickly. So in 3 years, I was up and running and building startups again. I mean, actually in 6 months, I was already building another company and kind of recovered and paid back a lot of the debts that I have, and kind of recovered completely and recovered my trust in the market. Not a lot of people can do that. So, and not a lot of people have the access, and not because I'm special, it's just sometimes you're lucky in how you're positioned and the market situation and the people I'm surrounded with. So, I wanted to save people from going through this. And also, I believe that a lot of people have great ideas that that if they get it out there and they put it in practice, they can build a great company, hire great people, serve the community. So, and I'm great at teaching. So what's better than someone who's studies all the time, because I love reading, and great at teaching, and have been through the experience than to teach other entrepreneurs. So, and I have the belief that if you can, you must, kind of thing. So that is I think where it comes from, and where I'm super excited and always thrilled about having the opportunity to help entrepreneurs. So that's where it comes from. The other thing that it comes from is I've seen a ton of people that that have ideas that never materialize. My dad, for example, was a writer. He wrote poetry. He wrote scripts for movies, and he never pursued his passion for several reasons. Number one, he was prevented from writing in Syria because we're a free country.
In quotations marks.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So he was prevented from writing because he wrote something in his private memoirs about, or private journals about the president, kind of a joke. So his one of his friends, that's something that happens in Syria a lot, unfortunately, is one of his friends went and told the Secret Service, or the Mukhabarat, we call them in Syria, about him. So he was dragged, about to be thrown in jail for 16 years. We don't see him. He was saved from that by connections that my uncle had. But the give was, you're never going to write any, like, in your life. You can't publish here, something like that. So he felt he couldn't pursue his dream and his passion. And I saw how that broke a person, because I saw him, he's always someone who's very talented, very creative, but he was never able to share that creativity. I read his poetry. I got to read some of his work when I went into his stuff, and inspired me, but I saw how much that inspire other people. So that's one of the things that also, that I saw what it does to a person's spirit when they're unable to pursue their ideas, to pursue their dreams, to kind of go ahead and experiment with something. Whether they fail or not doesn't matter, but just go after that. Yeah, so that's the other thing. And I hate having a job. I hate it with a passion. I hate other people having a job. Now, there's a job and there's a job, in the sense that I do believe that we need to move to a place where jobs are different quality of jobs, where people are able to pursue their creativity within their job and to give more of themselves and to experience themselves to the maximum ability. So in order to do that, you need to be trained to be an entrepreneur, basically someone who inside is a mover and shaker. So at least you have those skills. So if you want to, you can. So these are some of the motivators of why I pursue this.
I think those skills are super important, especially now with COVID-19. People are forced to be creative. They're forced to look outside the box and see, okay, how can I make money in other ways that I haven't traditionally done so.
Yeah.
But I want to go back. So your father was a writer. How did that inspire you to write? And did you get your passion? Because you're, obviously very creative and, great writer. I've read lots of your stuff.
Let me puff off my chest a little bit. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I am.
So is that where you get your writing chops from?
It definitely helped knowing that my dad is a writer, but I think one of the biggest things that that inspired me when I was studying is I was probably a creative person. I believe everybody's creative, but to a certain extent, I had an affinity for creative things, and I look where the spotlight is. Growing up, I crave the spotlight. I crave to be in the spotlight. So whatever it is, I sang, I'd be on stage. I'm always volunteering to anything. So my wife always tells me, you raise your hand before you hear the end of the question. Who will do? And my hand will go up. So I had that, and I think one of the biggest thing that the people that are in the spotlight in Syria, in our part of the world, which I think is a very distinct difference than let's say the Western world. So if you look at, in particular, North America, who are the people in the spotlight? The people in the spotlight are athletes and actors, celebrities, what is it, reality show hosts or stuff like that, TV hosts. These are the least respected people in our community. So that is, I think, a distinct difference. The highest respected people in our community are writers, authors, people who write books, philosophers, thinkers, like Noam Chomsky, for example. That would be he will be idolized in the world. And I don't mean by the media, I mean by everybody on the street. So people would, so it's kind of a bit of a history. It comes from the Arabic culture before, regardless of Islam. Mecca was that's why they call it the Mecca of something. Mecca was, before Islam, was a place where people went to trade, where people worshipped like other idols, these wooden statues and stuff like that. But it's also where poets from each tribe will come and compete. And instead of fighting, they would compete of who beats the other with poetry. Because the biggest thing, our language, the Arabic language, was not a written language. So it was you show your chops by how much you remember and how many of the complex words would you know, basically how big your lexicon is and how many, how capable are you to communicate. So imagine that's the history. A lot of people probably don't think of us like that. They think Islam or whatever. So that's where it comes from, and that's why language is very important. And everybody who has a command of language in our culture is highly, highly respected. So poets are the highest respected people. So compared, let's say, the most famous poets in the Arab world are, I mean, it's not the same since the 2000s and moving forward, because media, you have singers or whatever, just like that. But before that, while I was growing up, my generation, if you hear of a poet, poet is as, let's say, famous as, I don't know, the Rolling Stones, for example, or the Beatles. Those are poets at the time. Nobody would go to a concert to attend, somebody singing. Who's the idiot is going to do that? They would go attend. You would find stadiums, I mean, as far, or auditoriums that are filled to listen to a poet. So that's my fascination with language, and why I loved language, and why. So because I wanted to be in spotlight, and to be in the spotlight in that part, you had to have command of language. And also, I grew up around a large library in our home. We were filled with libraries, and we had book English and Arabic. So. And my fascination with English came from my love for music. So I listened to music when I was young, from Michael Jackson to rock music to blues and I wanted to sing, and that's how I got my accent. And I love sitcoms. So combine all of those. I think when you get the comedy of a language, you get the language. So I started listening to those and reading, and I had a fascination with movies, and that's how I got. Now, where I got my language in English, because I write, actually I am more expressive right now in English than in Arabic. In Arabic, I used to write a lot of poetry. I used to write more poetry because that's how I got my wife to fall in love with me. But the English one came from my fascination with business. Once I started reading in business and fascination of the mechanics of how you build and take an idea to execution, all of my reading, there's no writing. Arabic writing is always either poetry or politics, literature and analysis, stuff like that. There's no writing in business at the time when I was growing up. It's, of course, right now we have all these translations. There are people who are talking about business and stuff. But when I was growing up, there wasn't. So there's a lack in that. So I started reading in English, and that's how one of the reasons why I grew. I strengthened my language, and I became very skillful in writing, because that's my fascination. So that gives you an idea of where it comes from.
That's cool. You mentioned a while back about making sure that for startups, that when you started your art gallery business, that you need to make sure that the market is there. What other common issues, problems do you see startups having when they're starting out?
The biggest problem that I see is definitely not having a market. You can build the greatest idea, the greatest execution, have the greatest team, the most money. If there's no market, nobody to buy, it's worthless. So I think that's always the case. Is there a market? Now, how to find out that there's a market, that's the key. Because if it's just a matter of checking, hey, there's a market, let's build it, then great. The problem is not falling into the trap of thinking there's a market. So you have to find out there's a market. There's steps to do that. So number one, the idea doesn't matter. So you can take an idea that somebody else had. What is it? There's somebody who looked at Craigslist, and what they did is they took elements of Craigslist and shown that how brilliant companies were built by copying an element of Craigslist. So for example, let's say finding drivers, matching drivers with people who want to go places, that's Uber. Kind of hookups of people meeting each other, that's Tinder. So it's things like that. The idea doesn't have to be novel or new. If it is, great, but that's not what it matters. So I see a lot of people kind of get stuck on, is this a new idea? Is this a great idea? Bad idea with great execution for a market that's always growing, that you can generate revenue from. That's great. That's even better. I mean, who in the hell would have thought that, hey, I'm going to build a company where everybody can become a taxi driver? Who would think, oh, that's a great idea? And it even didn't start like that. Most of the great companies that we have right now didn't start the way that it is right now. Uber didn't start as, hey, everybody can be a driver. Uber started as a company where people can find drivers when they're outside, and it's more about exclusive and high-end and kind of a replacement for limos. That's where it started. And now it's like ubiquitous. So it doesn't matter what the idea is. It doesn't matter where it starts. It doesn't matter how you execute it, and are you executing it for the right market. So not getting stuck on the idea, testing immediately, and putting it in front of customers. So what do entrepreneurs do? They try to come up with the most novel idea. So they get stuck in the idea stage. They don't share it with anyone. They're very protective so that nobody can steal my idea. You've heard a lot. Nobody steals anybody's idea. Like, an idea is worthless, because an idea, if you look at the idea and you look at how much execution you have to do, who in their right mind will take your idea and execute on it for the next 3 to 5 years? Maybe they'll succeed. Now, was there ever a time where people stole ideas? Yeah, there is. I mean, what is it? Snapchat is a stolen idea. Because the two founders that created Snapchat, and there's a lawsuit, and the other founder won the lawsuit and got their shares and their names. So what is it? Steven Spiegel, I think, is now the CEO of. I don't know if I'm saying his last name. He basically according allegedly that he took the idea from. There were two people at the dorm that came with him because he has the business mindset, and said, here's the idea, and he ended up executing it on without them, or like kind of cutting it off. I can't remember the actual story, but cut him off halfway through, or basically continued without him. The same thing. I mean, what is it? Mark Zuckerberg. We know the stories. Like he said, he supposedly, allegedly, he took the idea from the, what is it? The so-and-so twins. And
yeah.
They even did a lawsuit, and they got money from him because of that. Now, whether or not, how do you consider stealing? But the key thing here is, for stealing the idea doesn't guarantee that's going to be executed and you're going to raise money from it. For every company that succeeds, there are hundreds, even thousands that fail. So success has nothing to do with the idea, has everything to do with the execution. Yes, if you have an idea that its time has come, it's the right market, and you execute well, that's great. So I think they get stuck on the idea. They don't execute as fast as possible. They don't put it in front of the customers. They're very protective. They don't share. And they take too much time. That's I think the problem. Some of the problems that entrepreneurs fall into.
Cool. So for one of the things that I think that startups have problems with is the marketing. How would you recommend, or how do you recommend startups market themselves, especially with little or no budget?
They need to do content marketing a lot. So one of the things that they need to do is to write excessively about the stages that they do. So write about the idea, write about, for example, Lean Startup, which is the book that kind of changed everything in how startups do things, was started as a blog post. Unbounce started as a blog for a year before they became a company, about how to build landing pages and all of that. Why is that? Because that's how you build an audience. So me and you, done a lot of writing, started ideas and tested and see if people are interested. Right now I'm writing my book, Unleash the Startup of You. And the first thing I did is the first piece of writing, the introduction. I wrote it and I put it online, and I linked it to a landing page. The book is still in the making, but I've put something out there. And I said to people, I'm writing this book now. Somebody can definitely take, hey, that's a good idea, and they can write the book. Good for them. But the key here is that they're not going to write the same book, because I'm writing my own book. They're not going to know everything that I'm doing. Paulo Coelho, one of his books that he wrote, I can't remember the name of the book. He actually, opposing his publishing company, released parts of the book as they continued. I don't know I can't remember the name of the book that he did that.
Yeah.
But you heard the story, right? He released parts of the book, and it's like, why you're doing? People are not buy the book. People bought the book. So the key thing here is, if you don't have budget, you can always write. You can always take an hour, 2 hours and write. And you don't have to be an amazing writer. You don't have to write like the New York Times, for example. You're writing for your audience. You're writing for a certain audience that will appreciate that you're communicating with them authentically. And there's a ton of resources about writing that you can benefit from and can get you started. If you're not clear on what are those, then send us a few messages, me and you, and you can even hire, like a writer to help you with kind of do an interview with you and write about your story, like you're doing with me right now.
Mm-hmm.
So I think the key thing is that money. That's one of the problems that entrepreneurs have, is I don't have the money, I don't have the resources. Well, what can you do with what you have? You can still write. You have time, like everyone else. You can write, you can communicate, you can share on social media. A lot of it, the tools are free. I just shared an article on Medium, and you can find it on my LinkedIn. It's called The Gigantic List of Amazing Startup Resources. There's a ton, there's 844 tools, resources, and articles that will help you get started no matter what your idea is. So there is that you can do, and there's a ton of those online. So start with something, start communicating with your audience. Any idea to get you started and communicating with your audience, to get you started in testing, and build from there. So marketing starts with content. Identify what we call the fire hoses of information, communities like Product Hunt, if you're building something that is techie, Hacker News, communities where people are. There are Slack channels where people congregate that have the same interests as you, and you can start communicating with them. Quora, for example, answering questions in your area of expertise. Anything that helps you stand out and build your personal brand, because you can attach that personal brand to the startup that you're doing. And that's what I think is very powerful, that you can get you started.
Okay, so you mentioned your book. I think now's a good time to talk about it. What's it about, and who is it meant to help?
Cool. So my book is about 3 things: about mastering your time, building your personal brand, and becoming the leader you were always meant to be. Now, it's based on the assumption that I believe that everybody's meant for greatness. Now, this is not like a new age belief, something like that. It's more it comes from a belief that I built based on dealing with a lot of people. Every single one I dealt with have the capability for more. So they can do more, they can help more, they can add value more. But most of the time they're held back. They're held back by, number one, not having the time. A lot of us have to put food on the table, pay the bills, all of that. So that takes time. And mostly we're using that time, building, working in a job, fulfilling whatever roles that we need to do. And what I found is that 90% of people have no idea how to master their time. They have no idea how to be more productive, how to kind of manage that. So the first thing I did is I reached out to my network, and instead of having opinions, like my opinions about what to do with your time, I'm kind of I obsess on how to build how to build up your productivity and be an amazing productive person. So throughout the time, I've read tons of books about that, but I didn't want this to be a summary of my learnings. One of the things I wanted to make it more real. So I reached out to my network, and I had hundreds of people respond to me and say, what are the tools and their things that they do to be more productive, or that helps them manage their time better. And I took those, and those are going to be the first part of the book. How do you master your time? Kind of streamed together through my writing and with the help of my co-authors. And also, I'm working with you to help me with that. So to help kind of string them together, to give people some great advice, some varied advice, because what I've learned from managing your productivity and managing your time is that everybody's personality is different. Like I read a ton of, the reason I read a ton of them is because whenever I read one and I tried to apply it, a lot of things broke apart and fell apart, broke down, didn't work for me. Some things worked for me. So I would take one thing from here, one thing from there. And I noticed that's the biggest challenge, is that people think it's either the whole thing or nothing at all. So since I had no problem in kind of breaking apart things and kind of doing what I want, having that confidence, I noticed that some people do not have that confidence. So this is a way to help them. Here's what other people are using. Feel free to kind of use them as Lego and play around and see what works for you. So that's the first part, which if you now master your time, you can have enough time to build your personal brand. Why do you need that? Because you already have a personal brand. People already think of you certain things, talk about you in a certain way, associate you with certain things. And as long as you don't control your brand, other people's do. But what you can do is you can shift the conversation. You can influence how people think about you. And if you can do that more in a more aware and a more predetermined way, and kind of having with keeping it top of mind, and it's something that you do on a regular basis, people get to know you for a certain way, and they start associating you with this, let's say, being the expert in certain thing, or being someone dependable or reliable, or someone that always delivers on their word, whatever it is that you think you represent with the brand. And now they will work with you more, they will reach out to you more. And that's, I think, is very important, because that's where jobs come from, that's where work comes from, that's what you associate with anything you touch. So if you write and people trust your word, for example, they'll take your writing in a certain way, as opposed to somebody they don't trust, for example. So that's why building your personal brand is very important. And the third thing is leadership. Why? Because our world needs leadership. We suck right now at leadership. If you look around at the global scene and you look at the leaders of the world, it's pathetic. We don't have leaders at all. A few years ago, 10 years ago, we had Mandela, we had Mother Teresa, we had who else? Like we had people that you can point to and say, you know what, I want to follow, I want to hear. But we're having less and less. Who can you point to in the world right now? You can say, you know what, I'll follow their footsteps. We don't have to. Now, it's good and bad. The good about it is that we kind of went past the age where there's one leader that will save us all, because that was never true. But we were in a part of the world where a lot of people, or a time in our evolution where a lot of people didn't have access. Now you have more access than those people had. So if you think the platform that Mandela had and the platform you have now access with social media tools and all the tools that are out there and what you can write and you can access, more than Nelson Mandela. Because it doesn't matter that if the Times picks up, let's say, an article that you wrote. You can write on Medium, and you can have articles that have more reach than some of the New York Times articles. You can have a YouTube channel, and you can be one of the biggest YouTubers in the world. There's nothing stopping you. So with that comes the responsibility of where do you want to lead people. So it's more not, it's less of telling people that you have to lead and you have to be more. It's not a moral approach, but it's like causing people to question, what is the impact you want to leave in the world, and are you being, conscious of that and moving towards it in a way that you chose, rather than it was chosen for you, or haphazardly happened. A lot of things will happen in your life by coincidence, but the things that you have a choice at, are you choosing it? So that is the arc of the book. And the reason I do that is these are the key things that I noticed that are, me, I'd like to keep things simple, 3 things, not 100 things. And these are the things that I saw whenever I worked with people that made the biggest impact in their lives and caused them to make the biggest impact on the people around them. Now that's basically my book and why I'm writing it, and what are the certain aspects of it.
I think one of the things people don't think about is personal branding, and I'm super passionate about it. I believe it's one of the most important things that you can do. It is, but people just go to work and then they come home and they watch TV and that's all they do. What are some things that will help build somebody's personal brand?
Yeah, I agree with you. A lot of people don't think of personal branding because they think of branding as something that comes with business. For example, the word brand, let's say you don't think of yourself as a brand. They have a lack of understanding of branding. They think branding is something you create, so it requires money. They don't think of brand as something that already exists. So it's the lack of understanding is the one. So a brand is what people think of you. Whether it's a company's brand is what people think of that company. Or whether you're a person, it's what people think of you. Put simply, it's what people say about you when you're not there. That's your brand. Now, whether you like it or not, you're a brand. So people think about you things, whether you want them to or whether you don't want them to. So they have an opinion of you, and they have they associate you with certain things, certain words. So maybe you are the fun person, maybe you're the reliable person, maybe you're always there, maybe you're someone who's maybe is negative. There's a lot of negative stuff. Oh, I can't depend on them, or they're strict, or whatever it is. So they associate you with that. Now, a lot of times, a lot of these things are not articulated, in the sense that if you ask somebody, what do you think of me? It's like, oh, I think you're nice. They don't think about that. They just have that going in their heads, in the background of their heads. So the key element here is there's a brand, you don't influence it, and it's there. So do you want it to serve you? Here's the question. Or do you want it to work against you? Because it's either or. There's no in between. And you need it, of course, to serve you. So in order to serve you, you need to understand what it is and need to influence it. Now, there's 2 approaches for this. One approach is the inauthentic approach, in the sense that you want to be seen as someone who you're not. And that will never work. It will fall apart. So we see it all the time. You see it with famous people, for example. You want to find out, like, hey, they project an image, and then people find out, like, oh, they're not that. They're tricking us. And people have a sense, we have our bullshit barometer. It's been developed over thousands and thousands of years. We're very good at representing that. And usually it's when something is being presented as perfect, we immediately call bullshit on it. Immediately. So just like the perfect phone call. So whenever something is presented as perfect, we call bullshit on it. So, I mean, to put it simply, but more sophisticated than that is that, what do you want yourself to be seen? So authentic way is, what are you really great at, and what do you really want to go after in the world? So there are several things. There's what you are as a person. So what you stand for, the things you believe in, the things you value most, things like that. And what do you want to leave behind you? So a lot of what we call your legacy. So these are things that influence. And once you're clear on that, so the way to do that is to get clear first on who you are to yourself, kind of like the self-image, and what do you want to project in the world, what do you want to leave a legacy. And once you're clear on those, then you need to actively work towards them. It cannot happen just because you believe something, just because you believe in being nice, that doesn't mean that you're being nice all the time. And being nice all the time doesn't mean that you know, just help your neighbors carry their groceries. It's not just about that. It's COVID, so avoid that. um, so it's really about how do you want to do it. So once you're clear on the what you stand for and what your morals are and why, what drives you to that, it's the how. The how distinguish you from somebody else. How you're being nice is different than how I'm being nice. And just the realization that when you do an act in an authentic way, you will have the following reactions. There will be people who love you, there will be people who hate you, and there will be people who don't give a shit. Okay? Now, your role is to make the people who love you for the right reasons. So for knowing you, not just for loving you because they like you, and make the people who don't care. So more of the people who don't care, you know, care about you. So win them to your side. And the people who hate you, maybe you recognize them so that they know what they hate you for and they stay away. So you're not going to win everyone. If you by trying to win everyone, you're going to become bland. You're going to become, you know, like the hated person by the people who truly care about you. Kind of like the difference between, what is a good example, maybe we go into politics a little bit, the difference between Obama and Bernie Sanders, for example. So Obama says the right things. You know, he's a great politician. If you listen to him, it's like, you're going to like him. But then if you look a little bit deeper, it's like, what did he really say? Like, for example, we have to progress. We have to do more. It's like, that sounds good. I'm going to sign up to that. But what does that really mean? As opposed to, for example, Bernie Sanders, when he says, everybody has to have healthcare. Everybody needs to, everybody, you know, I believe that everybody having healthcare is a right, or it's a crime not to have everybody, you know, having access to, let's say, higher education, let's say. And I'm going to fight for doing that, whether I'm president or not, or for something like that. Now, whether you like that or not, whether you believe in that or not, you know that person stands for something. You know where they stand. You know why you're hating him. You know why you love him. Whereas if you ask people who love and hate Obama, why you love and hate Obama, and you look at it as like, but like you're both right, but like there's no substance. And that is, I think, the biggest thing is the difference between saying and standing. Now, I'm not saying that Obama is all bad, or, you know, but a lot of what he says can be applied to everything. It's kind of like a Nike, you know, motto, which is just do it. You know, you can apply it to anything. It's a great saying, and you can say Nike, just do it. You know, Coca-Cola, just do it. You know, or what is a good brand of beer? Or Corona, just do it.
Say Corona.
You know, you can apply it to all of that. That's the problem with, you know, bland, you know, statements that doesn't stand for anything. So in the same way, you have to learn. It's branding. That's why I think people avoid it, is that they think it's about, I don't want to lie to people. I don't want to, you know, trick people, because that's what we associate. We associate with advertising, with saying the message but not delivering. Whereas true personal branding is about, what do you stand for really, and what do you execute into everyday's world, and what do you not gonna let go until the day you die, basically. So that is just to be dramatic.
All right, let's so I mentioned you're a serial entrepreneur. One of the things that one of the spaces that you're working in is blockchain.
Mm-hmm.
Can you tell us a little bit what you're doing, your company, and why you've stepped into this space?
So blockchain is, for me at least, is one of the most fascinating technologies that I've so I told you I'm fascinated with science, fascinated with technology since I was young. For me, science and technology was the same. Obviously, when growing up, I realized that a little bit different, obviously. So I'm more now geared into technology. I still love science, read science a lot of times. and get fascinated, kind of go down rabbit hole things. But technology is fascinating for me. I keep on reading, and that's how I got into blockchain. I heard about it at the time. I heard about Bitcoin, and I heard about the financial aspect of things. And since my history, a little bit now, and my history with money, it's like, nah, this is not for me. And then I got to know. What blockchain actually does for people, and how the technology works through a workshop. So I attended a workshop because I was in Launch Academy and I was fascinated. It's like, this is it's a great technology. So I started reading, and the more I read, the more dumb I felt because it's such a complex technology that it was hard. It took me like several months to understand a few things. And because of the content explosion, there's a lot of fluff content out there about the technology that doesn't deliver real substance. So started reading, started learning, and got fascinated. And I decided to build a company that we don't technically do blockchain technology, but what we do is we teach about blockchain technology, and then grew to teach about emerging technologies, and that's Next Decentrum. And built several courses for blockchain. One of them is on Udemy right now. That's a small course just to help people kind of get into the world of blockchain. And I tried to make it simple, visual, simple. And it wasn't an easy task. It's a very difficult thing. And now working on building larger courses to help people learn the technology, mostly because of my fascination with it, but also because I think it opens up the doors for a lot of people to participate in the upcoming wave. Blockchain technology, just like the internet, in the sense that it's a massive wave, but it's not like, let's say, AI, where even though it's been developed and growing for a long time right now, but it's right now everybody's AI, and it's a complex technology, but if you learn it, it doesn't open up a lot of things for you, in the sense that you can build something in AI, but it doesn't expand your understanding of anything. So let's say you build artificial intelligence to something, that makes that thing do the task, let's say, faster, better, cheaper, more complex, let's say, but you forget about it. Whereas in blockchain is really a way of thinking. So it's a framework of thinking, not the speed of thinking. AI is more, let's say, think about it, the speed of thinking. So once you achieve the speed of thinking, you're not thinking about it. But a way of thinking changes the whole world, changes how you see the world. So a way of thinking about blockchain is a way of thinking, and it's in particular decentralized way of thinking, where instead of collecting all your data in one place, you now can decentralize and give it to other people. Well, then what does that do with security? What does that do to access? How do you do governance, for example? Like, if you think about it, how do you guarantee that a government, like the US government or Canadian government, has real representation? How do you guarantee that certain contracts that were promised and signed gets executed, regardless of and limit the ability of people of getting out of the contract or kind of weaseling their way out of it? Guarantee that people get paid. All of these things are very, very hard problems because it includes the human element and includes the element of trust. Can you execute that and turn it into code, where it's a very, very clear-cut execution elements? Can you do that? And that's a very, very hard problem to solve. And blockchain sector, which is decentralized, technology, plays in that area, plays in the area of moving trust from a human thing that is enabled by technology to something that is completely technology driven. A good example of that, kind of to explain the jargon that I just threw at you, is if you think of money. Right now, to give money to someone, you have to, let's say you've done a job for me. Let's say I hire you to do, let's say, my marketing, a ton of, let's say, articles, and we agree on a payment. I have to receive those articles, verify, and then let's say I pay you, and I know I'm paying you because, let's say in person, it's a cash payment. I know I'm paying you, I can recognize you, you're the person who delivered the. So trust relies in my understanding of that trust, and in your understanding that, yeah, this is what we agreed and all that. How do you if you put that online, if I want to send you the payment, I have to know what your bank account is, and I have to do it through my bank. You can't do it. You won't accept it through, let's say, Hussein coin. Like, what is Hussein coin? I don't want to accept Hussein coin. Who uses Hussein coin? You want dollars, for example. You want to use the technology that exists. You won't accept Hussein Pay. You won't send me payment or accept payment on Hussein Pay. You won't give me your details on Hussein platform because it's not a trusted platform. You do it through your bank. You do it through PayPal. But you forget that bank and PayPal actually get hacked quite a bit. And even though you trust them, but a bank can literally wipe out all the money that you have with them right now without recourse. So let's say right now in COVID times where you can't go to the bank and all of it is online. Let's say your bank right now, let's choose a small bank. It doesn't occur to me.
Bank of Hussein.
Bank of Hussein, let's say. It chooses to, close your account, and you're stuck calling them, and they're not answering a call. What recourse do you have? You had $100,000 in their bank account, in your bank account there, and it's gone. So you have no recourse. So this is the challenge of centralized systems, that it gives too much control for a few people. Whereas decentralized systems, what happen, number one, you have a large group of people who believe in or who back that money. Right now, if your government, let's say the US government or the Canadian government has bad leadership, and they make different choices and the value of money goes down, like the Venezuelan money. And suddenly you had all this money and suddenly that money is worthless. You can't protect against that. Whereas if you look at Bitcoin, for example, there's a ton of people that are using it, and the money value is separated from, let's say, the ability of a few people to manipulate it or change it. Nobody can change now Bitcoin. Nobody controls Bitcoin. Okay, even if the community of developers right now that are responsible combine together, they can't change the system. Even if Satoshi Nakamoto, we find out who he is, who's the inventor of Bitcoin, who we don't know who he is. It's a pseudonym for someone or a group of people. Came out right now and say, I want to change Bitcoin to this. Nobody would listen to him because the power is not with him, the power is with the people who run the code on their machines. So that decentralized power is very powerful. So it gives power to the currency. And once the transaction happens, if you give me your Bitcoin address, I have my Bitcoin address and I send it to you, it's sent, done. There's no recourse. If I send you money through my bank and I call my bank and say, hey, I actually sent money to Joel, and it turned out that he's defrauded me, he didn't send me the stuff, the bank will take the money back. So, I mean, this is just a simple example, but there are so many complex layers that you build on it with code. So turning contractual agreements into code is a very powerful idea. We call them smart contracts. Basically, it's taking any agreement that we have as human agreement and trying to turn it into code that executes when certain conditions are met. So you do X1, 1, 2, 3, X, Y, Z get executed. So that's a very powerful idea, and moving to a community where we don't have to, let's say there's this COVID-19 disaster. And let's say we agree that it's by law that if a certain problem happens of this scale and people, let's say you have, let's say personal insurance, for PI they call it, or something like that.
Oh, yeah.
Personal insurance, and you're owed. You don't have to wait until the government convenes, and like it's automatic. You get fired from a job and that's logged in by your company. Automatically, the money comes from the government and let's say goes to your bank account, for example. You have to apply, prove anything, go through that process. It's just written in code and gets executed once certain conditions are met. So this is the kind of thing. For example, the distribution, the supply chain that we have right now and the challenges we have with that. If we had blockchain applied supply chain, we know exactly how many rolls of toilet paper are on the way, who's buying them, how it's being sold, all of that. And we would have no worries about, is there supply chain? We wouldn't have somebody had to stand on a podium just to ensure that they spoke to the heads of, the supermarkets and there is enough in supply chain. It will be transparent. You can look at supply chain and say, oh, we have enough supply chain for the next 8 months. And it's just coming and it's going to arrive at this date, this date, this date.
So it sounds like a lot of the problems that we're facing now with, shortages of items like, like toilet paper that you're mentioning, people accessing government funds, that can all that stuff be solved if blockchain is put in place?
I would say blockchain allows the infrastructure for it to be solved. The solutions are there. It's just that because it relies a lot on human factors and on old way, even on the software and the infrastructure that exists right now is supervised by humans. If you think about it, humans are controlled by emotions. Fear for your job, fear for, like for example, you might delay telling your boss about a bad news, which delays them making a decision, which delays and rack up from that. Software doesn't care. Something happens, and if it's in the software that is going to execute based on these, let's say, metrics, it executes. There's no delay. So it's just turning things into software. And what blockchain is, excuse me, what blockchain gives you, it gives you the infrastructure where you can trust these things will execute, because the manipulation is harder because of the decentralized ability. So a centralized system is that doesn't mean that decentralized system cannot be compromised, but it's less likely to be compromised. If you can definitely build that software within a centralized system, but it's more likely to be compromised and penetrated and having people, stop it. So I think that's the key, the difference. And that's what blockchain enables. It's not that blockchain will solve that. And that's, I think, one of the biggest challenges is a lot of people that didn't understand the technology from the start thought, oh, this is going to solve all of it. Just like they think right now, AI will solve anything. The technology is just a way to accelerate, confirm, empower, enable certain elements. You as a human being or a group of human beings need to take those decisions and need to build and use that technology in a way that will make that happen. So that's why the reason why I want to teach people about that, because with blockchain, you're more capable of, if you understand it, you can apply it. Blockchain is a hard technology to implement, but it's not a hard technology to use. It's not hard to use Bitcoin. It requires definitely a certain understanding different than how we used to understand the world, but we're not asking you to design a blockchain system. But you need to know enough to actually use it and not be afraid of it.
So in the blockchain companies, how are you seeing content marketing being used?
For a long time, it was one of the key elements because when a new technology or emerging technology arrives to the scene, the biggest thing is education. How do you educate people? So content is the key. I don't think I've seen any blockchain company succeed without relying on content marketing as a key. And of course, because of a lot of the challenges that came with a new technology and the lack of understanding, a lot of the scams that came with it, just like the .com, let's say, bubble, where we had a lot of scams as well, a lot of bad ideas. The same thing happened with blockchain. The challenge is it came at a time where there is more awareness and you can reach out to more people. So they found the need to educate people. They have to educate people about what they do, how they do it. So content is definitely the core vehicle to kind of inform people about that and educate people. So content took center stage. And with the scams, a lot of platforms banned advertising for anything that has to do with blockchain or crypto currency or crypto, let's say, anything that has to do with crypto, the crypto space. Sometimes blockchain crypto is kind of interchangeable. It's not, but
lumped into each other, right? Yeah.
Yeah, but a lot of people use them interchangeably. So a lot of the challenge is how do you beat that? If you can't advertise, and you can't reach people in certain ways, the remainder is, let's say, communities, education, content in many different forms, video, written, infographics, and content delivered to presentations and events. So content took center stage when it comes to, let's say, the blockchain and any emerging technologies, mainly because also it's expensive to advertise. And especially for an emerging technology, it's not guaranteed that everybody will jump in. So you'll be wasting your advertising dollars.
Awesome. All right. So I asked this question to all my guests. What is, and I think I know the answer, but you might surprise me. What is one book? I mean, you've said that you've read so many books, hundreds of books on all sorts of subjects. What is the book that has influenced you the most in your life?
The book that influenced me the most in my life is I would say conversation. Is it conversation or conversations with God?
Okay. I
Does
did
that
not
surprise
expect
you?
that. Yeah,
Yeah.
I thought you were gonna say Lean Startup for sure.
Um, it didn't, in the sense that that's a part of, definitely is one of the top books I would recommend. But Conversations with God is the book that influenced me the most, because the time that it came with, and it changes my relationship to that part. I grew up in the Arab world, in Syria. Syria is not a very religious country, but it's still, there's a lot of religious people around that. And Islam, I think, for other people who are committed Christians, they might relate to that. Religion is a major part of life. And I think the difference with Islam is that Islam also has a legislative and everyday life part of it. So it's not just your relationship with God, as your, a lot of people kind of legislate, or like to legislate at least, based on Islam, and use it to govern your morals, your, how you treat others, and all of that. So that kind of, you grew up around that. And I was lucky because my parents are not very religious, and I didn't know what religion I was until I was, I think, fifth grade. And my religion school, we had a religion, a teacher in schools, asked me, what religion are you? And I, like, well, I don't know what that means. I was in a private school. It was an Armenian school. I used to go to
Oh,
church with Armenians. I think it was Roman Catholic. I don't know, or I don't know what. Like, there's a lot of sects there within. So Syria has 15% Christians, so it's part of everyday life. We have Christian neighborhoods, like basically majority Christians living there, and a lot of our friends. So it was not like that segregation in the sense like, oh, you know what, you're different. So I used to go to church, and I didn't know, like, I didn't know what's that about, in the sense that I wasn't that, religion was not part of my life as growing up. So that gave me a little bit of perspective, in the sense that I wasn't that attached. I didn't grow up in a very religious family. But when I was teenagers, in my teenage years, I was looking for the truth. So I started reading all of the, we're Ismailis, so we're a sect of the Islamic, we're not Sunnis, or so. Ismailis are not strict as well in Islam, and Islam doesn't like kind of govern every part of your life. But and we believe there's a man that represents God here, so it's very close to to how Christians think. And so I started researching. I started learning about religion, and trying to find the truth, and trying to find salvation, if you wish. I think that's the time when people look for that. So I started with Islam, read the Bible, or one of the Bibles that I had at hand. We had the Bible at home, and we had also the Torah. Yeah, so I read those, kind of searching for, and I read the Sunnis, books, and I read everything. By the early 20s, I had kind of, I reached a point where I didn't want to read anymore, and I didn't want to give time for that, because I reached, like, I couldn't find the truth, the ultimate truth, because that's what I was looking for. I was looking, where's the ultimate truth? I want to be part of those people who are saved, and who know the way, and that kind of thing. And when I moved to, I think when I moved to Dubai in 2003, 2004, I was introduced to that book. And what it did, it it's a it's a very well written book. First, like, it's fabulous from how the language kind of how the language weave into each other. So it's a brilliantly written book, and it kind of gives a human perspective on the relationship with an entity called God. It has, the person who's there is religious. He's not pushing his ideas on you. So it kind of freed me from my past, because I kind of left that there and I never touched it, in the sense that I'm not going to deal with that because it's not the time, it's not helping me in any way. So I left it. But that kind of was the resolution, and I kind of was at home with my relationship with God, which is, I don't want a relationship with God kind of thing. So it was my path, even though a lot of people would probably take a different path with it, which is kind of get closer to God. For me, I became more secular after that. But it was a brilliantly written book, fabulous time. It has 3 parts, great relationship. And it's not about God in particular. It's about how human beings think about all of the elements that they pass in their lives, like our relationship with war, with each other, how we think about money, how we think. That's why I think the brilliance of that book. So it's a brilliant, brilliant book. I highly recommend it to read it. But yeah, that's my complex relationship and why it's the most influential book, because at the time when it came, kind of gave me that permission to go do whatever I want and kind of be at peace with whatever my search was. And that's why I'm kind of a weird person when it comes to talking about religion. And because I defend people's right to kind of believe in religion, but I also stand against the stupidity in anything, whether it's religion or anything, against any religion doing that. So people don't know where to put me. And it's because of my upbringing and the kind of reading that I had in many different ways.
And who's the author?
The author is Neil Donald Walsh.
Okay, awesome. Yeah. Well, thank you, Hussein, for being on this show. I appreciate your time. Where can people find you?
You can find me, search Hussein Hallak on Google. You'll find a ton of stuff about me. I'm awesome, famous. No, I'm just joking. You'll find probably, I used to have a website, HusseinHallak.com, but I think right now I haven't paid attention to it, so it's off or something. Find me on LinkedIn, Twitter, HH Unleashed, if you search HH Unleashed. I think it's the best places to find me. Medium, obviously. So if you go to Medium and find me there, that's probably where you can read. I have articles on LinkedIn, Medium, and go to Learn Progress, which is learn.nextdecentrum.com, which is where I curate a lot of the work around startups and emerging technologies, and about COVID right now. So just because I'm tired of people spreading stuff that are worthless, I like to curate things that people can find helpful. And my belief, my support for science and scientific stuff. So yeah, you can find me anywhere like that.
Awesome. And remind us what your book is called and where people will be able to find it.
It's called Unleash the Startup of You. And oh my God, where did I put the link? Hang on for 1 second. What is it? Unleash the book. What is it? You know what? I'll give you.
We'll put it in the show notes, and it'll be
exactly.
It'll be available on Amazon, I'm assuming.
Once I launched it, I have no idea. So this is the part of me right now. I'm validating the idea. Actually, if you go to did I publish it on LinkedIn? I think I published it on Medium. There is the search for El Dorado on Medium, and there I have the link to my book, which is what I should look for right now. But there I have the link to my book, and probably is going to be there. You can sign up for early release in the sense that you're interested in hearing about it. And I'll share with you the chapters of the book as they're being written. So yeah, feel free to do that.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Hussein.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me. I really, really enjoyed this. And yeah, had a great fun. Yeah. Great questions as always. You're amazing at the things I spoke about here. I haven't spoken, most of them, I would say 80% of them I haven't spoken about before. So that's an accomplishment for having a conversation with me. Thanks for that. Had a good fun.
Bye for now.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to Publishing for Profit. Please like and subscribe on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts.